An elderly woman, with her 8-year-old grandson Leo at the checkout, was tremblingly counting her coins to pay for groceries. But the impatient and rude cashier, Gary, began to humiliate her in front of everyone with cruel words. As shame grew in Clara's eyes each second, she tried to maintain her dignity for her grandson. What no one noticed was that just behind them in line, a mysterious man in a black jacket, his face shadowed, was watching everything with a serious expression. And what this man, Keanu Reeves, is about to do is so unexpected and heartwarming, you won't be able to hold back your tears. Before we continue this touching story, let us know where you're watching from in the comments. If you enjoy real-life stories that teach a lesson like this, don't forget to subscribe to our channel, because tomorrow, another very special story awaits you. The winter sun over New York City that morning was a pale, reluctant disk, offering little warmth against the biting wind that whipped down the avenues, a relentless assailant. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, making even the thickest coats feel inadequate. Pedestrians hurried along, heads bowed, shoulders hunched, their breath pluming in the frosty air. A city in perpetual motion, yet each soul seemingly cocooned in its own solitary battle against the elements. Among them, a figure moved with a different rhythm, an almost imperceptible counterpoint to the city's frantic pulse. Keanu Reeves, his features partially obscured by a simple dark beanie pulled low and the upturned collar of his well-worn, unassuming black wool coat, walked with a slow, deliberate pace. He wasn't heading to a film set, nor a high-profile meeting. Today, he was simply walking, driven by an inner stirring he couldn't quite name, a subtle but persistent hum beneath the surface of his thoughts. This urge had been with him for days, a quiet counter-melody to the usual demands of his life. It wasn't a call to adventure, nor a premonition of doom, but rather a deep, almost melancholic yearning for something authentic. In a world of curated images and scripted realities, he often found himself searching for the unvarnished truth of human experience. The raw, unfiltered moments that lay hidden beneath the city's gleaming, indifferent facade. He'd declined his driver that morning, choosing instead the anonymity of the sidewalks, the embrace of the city's unscripted narrative. His security detail, two shadows as discreet as the winter mist, maintained a respectful distance, accustomed to his occasional need for these introspective sojourns. But even they couldn't guess what specific frequency Keanu was attuned to today. What was he truly looking for in this concrete labyrinth of fleeting encounters and hurried lives? And why did this particular morning feel so charged with an unspoken potential, a sense of impending significance? His gaze, often described as soulful or enigmatic, swept across the faces he passed. A fleeting collage of human emotion. A mother's tired smile, a businessman's furrowed brow, a street performer's hopeful eyes. He wasn't looking for anything in particular, yet he was looking at everything. It was a habit honed by years of observing, of trying to understand the myriad characters he portrayed, and perhaps the character he himself was still trying to fully grasp. But today, his observation felt different, sharper, as if he were a divining rod, guided by an unseen current towards an unknown discovery. This feeling, this subtle pull, was both unsettling and strangely compelling. He found himself on a less glamorous, more residential street. The towering edifices of Midtown, giving way to older brownstones and bustling neighborhood stores. The air here, though still cold, seemed to carry different scents. Roasting coffee, freshly baked bread. The faint, metallic tang of the subway grates. It was here, amidst the everyday thrum of life, that his steps began to slow. He passed a small local grocery store, its windows slightly fogged, a modest sign proclaiming daily essentials. It wasn't a place he would normally frequent, yet something made him pause. Was this the destination his inner compass had been pointing towards? Or was it merely a prelude to what was yet to come? The very ordinariness of the place seemed to amplify the unusual nature of his presence there. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed, casting a flat, utilitarian glow over aisles cambiamento, with a kaleidoscope of products. The atmosphere was a mundane symphony of beeping scanners, rattling carts, and the low murmur of conversations. It was in this theater of the everyday that the scene which would etch itself into Keanu's memory, and soon into the hearts of millions, began to unfold. Near the checkout, an elderly woman, her movements careful and deliberate, was holding the small, weathered hand of a young boy. This was Clara and her grandson, Leo. Clara's worn but meticulously clean coat, a faded blue that had perhaps seen brighter days and happier occasions, seemed to offer little defense against more than just the winter chill. Her face, etched with the fine lines of a life lived with both love and hardship, was a study in quiet dignity. Her silver hair was neatly pulled back, revealing eyes that, though tired, still held a gentle, unwavering light, especially when they rested on Leo. 8-year-old Leo, a bright spark of innocence beside her, clutched a small, colorful package of chocolate cookies, his eyes wide with a mixture of anticipation and a child's pure joy. This small treat, Keanu would later learn, was more than just a confection. It was a precious link to a cherished memory, a whisper from a love that had been tragically cut short. Clara had navigated the aisles with the precision of a seasoned strategist, her gaze lingering on price tags, her hands carefully selecting only the most essential items. A bag of rice, a carton of milk, a loaf of whole wheat bread, a small bag of apples. Each choice was a silent calculation, a balancing act between need and the stark reality of her meager pension. This pension, her sole income after a lifetime of quiet, unassuming work, was stretched a venti to its limit each month, a constant reminder of the precariousness of her and Leo's existence. The sudden loss of her daughter, Sophia, 2 years prior in a devastating car accident, had not only left an unfillable void in her heart, but had also thrust upon her the full responsibility of raising her grandson. The promise she had made to Sophia on her deathbed, to care for Leo, to give him as much happiness as her modest means would allow, was both her guiding star and her heaviest burden. Today that burden felt particularly acute. Was it the unpaid utility bill her mind, or the knowledge that Leo's winter boots were almost worn through? Or was it something less tangible, a premonition of the small, yet deeply significant trial that awaited her at the checkout? As they approached the register, Clara's hand instinctively went to the small, worn coin purse in her pocket. She could feel the familiar, insufficient weight of the coins within. The cookies for Leo, a last-minute addition fueled by the hopeful shine in his eyes and the poignant memory of Sophia, had tipped the delicate balance of her budget. She took a deep, almost imperceptible breath, a silent prayer on her lips that somehow, by some small miracle, the coins would be enough. She had to stay strong for Leo, to shield him from the harsh realities that constantly nipped at the edges of their fragile world. It was at this moment, as Clara began to lay her few items on the conveyor belt, her movements slow and deliberate, that Keanu, standing a few places back in the queue, felt that inner stirring intensify. His gaze, Initially a general observation of the store's patrons, now narrowed, focusing with an almost preternatural intensity on the elderly woman and the small boy. He saw not just poverty, but a quiet, fierce love. He saw not just worn clothes, but a lifetime of resilience. And in the way Clara clutched her coin purse, he saw a familiar anxiety, a vulnerability that resonated with something deep within his own, often unacknowledged, past. He didn't know their story yet, but he sensed it was a story that needed to be heard. A story that perhaps he was uniquely positioned to witness, and maybe, just maybe, to change. The stage was set. The cashier, a young man named Gary, his face a mask of bored indifference, called out, "Next!" And Clara, with Leo by her side, stepped forward into the harsh, unforgiving spotlight of public scrutiny. What was about to unfold would test the limits of her dignity, and in doing so, would unknowingly test the resolve of the silent observer in the black coat. The checkout lane buzzed with the low hum of scanners and the rustle of plastic bags, a mundane soundtrack to countless daily transactions. But for Clara, as she stepped up to the counter, it felt as if all sound had been sucked into a vortex of her own rising anxiety. Gary, the cashier, barely glanced up from his screen, his movements mechanical, his expression one of weary disinterest that seemed to be a permanent fixture. He was young, perhaps in his late 20s, with a name tag askew on his faded blue smock, and eyes that held no spark of engagement, only the dull resignation of someone counting down the minutes until their shift ended. Clara carefully placed her meager selection on the conveyor belt. The rice, the milk, the bread, the apples, and finally, with a loving glance at Leo, the small, colorful package of chocolate cookies. Leo, oblivious to the storm brewing in his grandmother's heart, held the cookies a little tighter, his face alight with anticipation. "These are the special ones, Grandma," he whispered, his voice full of childish delight. "The ones Mom always said were magic mood lifters." A pang, sharp and familiar, shot through Clara's chest at the mention of Sophia. She forced a smile for Leo, a small, brave upturning of her lips that didn't quite reach her tired eyes. "Yes, darling, they are," she murmured, her voice a little shaky. Gary's scanner beeped with monotonous regularity as he passed the items over it. The total flashed on the small screen. Clara squinted, her heart sinking a little further. It was, as she had feared, just a fraction more than she had meticulously calculated. The cookies, those few, precious cookies, had pushed her over the edge. She fumbled in her coat pocket and pulled out the small, worn, floral-patterned coin purse. It had been Sophia's. The leather was soft and thin from years of use, the clasp a little loose. As she opened it, revealing a collection of carefully sorted coins, Gary, who had been impatiently tapping his fingers on the counter, let out an audible, exaggerated sigh. "Oh, for crying out loud," he muttered, loud enough for Clara and the people immediately behind her in line to hear. "Not coins, seriously." He leaned back, crossing his arms, a sneer forming on his lips. "This isn't a penny arcade, lady. Don't you have a card or something?" Clara's cheeks flushed a deep, painful crimson. Her hands, already trembling slightly from the cold and her own nervousness, now shook uncontrollably as she began to lay out the coins on the small rubber mat beside the register. I'm sorry," she stammered, her voice barely above a whisper. "I prefer to use cash. I just need to count it out." The simple act of counting, something she did with meticulous care every day, suddenly felt like an insurmountable task under Gary's scornful gaze and the impatient shifting of the customers behind her. Leo, sensing his grandmother's distress, looked up at Gary with wide, confused eyes. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the tone, the barely veiled hostility. He instinctively moved closer to Clara, his small hand seeking hers. "Well, hurry it up then," Gary snapped, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "We haven't got all day. Some of us actually have places to be." He gestured vaguely at the growing queue, a self-important smirk playing on his lips, as if he were performing for an audience. A few people in line shuffled their feet impatiently, some sighed audibly, while others studiously avoided looking at Clara. Their silence a different kind of judgment. Clara's fingers fumbled with the coins quarters, dimes, nickels, a handful of precious pennies. Each one represented a small sacrifice, a careful budgeting choice. She counted them slowly, her lips moving silently, her brow furrowed in concentration, desperate not to make a mistake under the mounting pressure. The metallic clinking of the coins on the counter seemed to echo in the sudden, uncomfortable silence that had fallen over the checkout lane. "You know," Gary continued, his voice louder now, clearly enjoying his perceived power over this frail, elderly woman. "Most people manage to figure out how much they have before they get to the register. It's called being prepared. Ever heard of it?" He let out a short, barking laugh. The humiliation was a physical weight on Clara's chest, making it hard to breathe. She could feel the stares of the other customers, some impatient, some pitying, some apathetic. All she wanted was to disappear, to shield Leo from this ugliness. She tried to focus, to count faster, but her mind was a jumble of numbers and shame. She was acutely aware of Leo beside her, his small hand now gripping hers tightly, his bright, innocent eyes clouded with a dawning understanding that something was terribly wrong. A few rows back, Keanu Reeves watched, his expression unreadable behind his dark sunglasses and the shadow of his cap. But beneath the calm exterior, a storm was gathering. He had seen this kind of casual cruelty before, in different forms, in different places. The powerful preying on the vulnerable, the impatient trampling on the dignity of the gentle. It was a scene that always stirred something primal within him, a deep-seated sense of injustice. He noted Gary's smugness, the way he seemed to draw energy from Clara's discomfort. He saw the flicker of fear and confusion in Leo's eyes. And he saw Clara, her shoulders slightly bowed, her face flushed, yet still trying to maintain a shred of composure, her trembling hands methodically arranging the coins. Her quiet resilience in the face of such blatant disrespect was, in its own way, a profound act of courage. But how much more could she endure before that quiet dignity shattered? And what was the story behind those carefully counted coins and the desperate need for a simple box of cookies? Keanu felt an undeniable pull to understand, to intervene, but the timing, the method, had to be right. A rash move could make things worse for Clara. He waited, a silent sentinel, his mind racing, his empathy coiling into a tight knot of impending action. The question was no longer if he would step in, but when and how. Clara painstakingly continued to count out her coins, each one a small testament to her struggle. The total on the register display loomed over her like a judge's gavel. She arranged the quarters in neat stacks, then the dimes, her movements made clumsy by the tremor in her hands and the heat rising in her face. Gary, meanwhile, had leaned back against his scanner, arms crossed, a look of bored superiority on his face. He made a show of checking his watch, then rolled his eyes dramatically toward the ceiling, as if appealing to some unseen power for deliverance from this tedious ordeal. "Seriously, Grandma, are we going to be here all day?" he drawled. his voice loud enough to carry down the line. "I've got a lunch break coming up, you know. Some of us have lives." A snicker rippled through a small group of teenagers further back in the queue. Clara flinched as if struck, but kept her head down, her focus solely on the coins. She was so close now. Just a few more. Then came the crushing realization. As she placed the last of her pennies on the counter, her heart sank. She was short. Not by much, but enough. Enough to mean that Leo's cookies, those precious chocolate cookies that were a tangible link to his mother, would have to be left behind. The small joy she had allowed herself in indulging him, the brief respite from their constant financial worry, evaporated, leaving a bitter taste of failure. Tears pricked at the back of her eyes, but she fought them back fiercely. Not here, not in front of Leo, not in front of this cruel young man. She took a shaky breath, her voice barely a whisper. I seem to be a little short. Please, could you remove the cookies?" Leo, who had been watching his grandmother's face with an anxious frown, immediately understood. His own face fell for a split second, the light in his eyes dimming, but then, with a courage that belied his tender years, he forced a bright, albeit wobbly, smile. "It's okay, Grandma," he piped up, his small voice surprisingly clear. "I wasn't really hungry for cookies anyway. Maybe next time." He patted her hand reassuringly. Clara's heart shattered into a million pieces at his brave little lie. He was trying to protect her, to ease her shame. The selflessness of his gesture, the depth of his love, was a painful reminder of everything she was trying to do for him, and how often she felt she was failing. Gary, however, saw none of this. He merely snatched the cookie package from the counter with an air of theatrical disdain. "Finally," he exclaimed, tossing the cookies unceremoniously onto a discard shelf beneath the register. "Took you long enough to figure that out. Now, can we please get this over with?" He looked pointedly at the remaining items and Clara's pile of coins. "Is this going to be enough? Or do we need to remove something else? Perhaps the luxury item, like, say, milk." His sarcasm was a blunt instrument, intended to inflict maximum damage. That was the moment. For Keanu Reeves, watching from a few feet away, that was the precise instant the unseen line was crossed. It wasn't just the humiliation of an elderly woman, or the casual cruelty towards a child's innocent wish. It was the utter lack of basic human decency, the gleeful exercise of petty power over someone vulnerable. It was the way Gary seemed to relish Clara's distress, the way he performed his contempt for the other impatient customers. Keanu had seen enough. The quiet observer was about to become an active participant. His jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. The air around him seemed to still, a subtle shift in the store's mundane atmosphere that only the most perceptive might have noticed. He took a slow, deliberate step forward. "Excuse me." Keanu's voice, though spoken softly, cut through the checkout lane's low hum with an undeniable authority. It wasn't loud, but it had a resonant timbre that made several heads turn, including Gary's. Gary, momentarily startled by the unexpected intervention from this unassuming man in the dark jacket and cap, looked up with an annoyed expression. "Yeah? What is it? You in a hurry too?" he snapped, clearly not recognizing the figure who had just addressed him. Keanu moved closer, placing himself subtly between Gary and Clara, creating a small, almost imperceptible shield. He ignored Gary's question, his gaze calm but incredibly direct. "I believe the lady was trying to pay for her groceries," he said, his tone even and measured. and I believe she deserves to do so with a modicum of respect." Gary scoffed, a smirk returning to his face. "Oh, here we go. Another hero. Look, buddy, I'm just trying to do my job. She's holding up the line with her piggy bank. If you want to defend her, maybe you can pay for her stuff." Keanu didn't flinch. "Perhaps I will," he replied. His voice still quiet, but now carrying an edge that made Gary pause. "But before we get to that, I have a question for you. Is this how your store trains its employees to treat customers? Especially elderly customers? And in front of a child?" The directness of the question and the unwavering intensity of Keanu's gaze seemed to finally penetrate Gary's apathetic shell. He shifted uneasily. "Look, I didn't mean any disrespect, all right? I was just trying to keep things moving." "Disrespect wasn't just meant, it was delivered," Keanu stated, his voice a quiet indictment. "There's a difference between efficiency and cruelty, between doing your job and abusing your position." The other customers in line were now silent, all eyes fixed on this unexpected confrontation. The air crackled with a new kind of tension. Clara looked up, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a dawning, fragile hope. Leo peeked out from behind her, staring at the tall man who had suddenly appeared to defend his grandmother. Who was this stranger? And why was he doing this? The unspoken questions hung heavy in the air. Gary, for the first time, looked genuinely flustered. This wasn't going the way he'd expected. This quiet man was not backing down. Gary, flustered by Keanu's calm but unyielding demeanor, tried to regain his composure, falling back on bluster. "Look, mister, who do you think you are, waltzing in here and telling me how to do my job? You got a problem. Take it up with the manager. Now, if you'll excuse me." He turned back towards his register, intending to dismiss Keanu and finalize Clara's meager purchase. "I think," Keanu said, his voice still level, but now carrying a new weight of authority that made Gary freeze mid-motion, "the manager might indeed be interested in this conversation, as would perhaps the CEO of this grocery chain." This was unexpected. Gary's bravado faltered. He looked at Keanu more closely, a flicker of unease, then dawning recognition in his eyes. The cap was pulled low, the sunglasses were dark, but there was something about the man's posture, the quiet intensity of his gaze, the unique cadence of his voice. A woman in the line behind Keanu gasped softly. "Wait a minute. Is that—" She whispered to her companion, her voice loud enough to carry in the suddenly hushed aisle. Another customer, a young man telephoned his phone, quickly lowered it, his eyes widening. "No way, it can't be." Keanu slowly reached up and removed his sunglasses, then took off his cap, running a hand through his dark, shoulder-length hair. The effect was instantaneous. The dim fluorescent lights of the grocery store seemed to momentarily coalesce around him, illuminating features recognized by millions around the globe. The collective intake of breath was audible. Whispers rippled through the line. "It is him. Keanu Reeves. What's he doing here?" Gary's face went from annoyed to confused to utterly, comically aghast. His jaw dropped, his eyes bulged, and the color drained from his face, leaving him a pasty white. "Ma'am, Mr. Reeves," he stammered, his voice a strangled squeak. The arrogant, sarcastic cashier was gone, replaced by a trembling, star-struck, and terrified employee. Clara, who had been watching the exchange with a mixture of gratitude and apprehension for the kind stranger, looked at him now with wide, uncomprehending eyes. Keanu Reeves? The famous movie star? Here, defending her? It seemed too surreal to believe. Leo, equally stunned, just stared, his small hand still clutching his grandmother's. Keanu offered a small, almost apologetic smile to the onlookers, then turned his full attention back to Clara, his expression instantly softening with genuine warmth and concern. He knelt beside her, bringing himself to her eye level and Leo's. "Clara," he said gently, his voice now a soothing balm. "I am so incredibly sorry you had to endure that. No one, absolutely no one, deserves to be treated with such disrespect." He glanced at the few items on the counter, then at the discarded package of cookies. "And Leo," he said, his eyes twinkling kindly at the boy, "I happen to think those chocolate cookies look absolutely delicious, and I believe a brave young man who tries to protect his grandmother deserves all the cookies he wants." Clara was speechless, tears finally overflowing and streaming down her weathered cheeks. These were not tears of shame, but of overwhelming gratitude and disbelief. Keanu then stood up and faced the still petrified Gary. "First," he said, his voice calm but firm, "we are going to cancel Mrs. Coleman's current transaction." He then pulled out his wallet. "Then, I would like you to ring up these cookies." And then, he turned to Clara and Leo with a warm, encompassing smile. "We are all going to go back through these aisles. And Clara, you and Leo are going to fill up a new cart with everything you truly need, and anything else your hearts desire. And it will all be on me." The store, which had fallen into a stunned silence, erupted not in chaos, but in a wave of murmurs, then outright exclamations of approval and admiration. Several customers started clapping. Gary, meanwhile, fumbled with the register, his hands shaking so much he could barely press the buttons to void the transaction. "But, Mr. Reeves, I can't accept," Clara began, her voice thick with emotion. Keanu gently placed a hand on her arm. "Clara," he said softly, "you spent a lifetime caring for others, for your daughter, now for Leo. Please allow someone to care for you, just this once. Think of it as a thank you from all of us who admire your strength and your love." He gave Leo a wink. "Besides, I haven't had a proper grocery shopping adventure in ages." And so began the most surreal and heartwarming shopping trip of Clara and Leo's lives. Keanu pushed the cart, his earlier anonymity completely gone. Yet he seemed utterly at ease, chatting amiably with Leo about his favorite superheroes and asking Clara about her week. He encouraged her to pick out fresh fruits, quality vegetables, good cuts of meat, items she hadn't allowed herself to even look at for years. Leo, after some initial shyness, was soon excitedly pointing out his favorite cereals, a new drawing book, and yes, several more packages of different cookies, Keanu adding them to the cart with a chuckle. Other shoppers watched, many with tears in their eyes, some discreetly filming on their phones, not in a paparazzi frenzy, but as if wanting to capture a rare moment of pure, unadulterated kindness. The store manager, alerted by the commotion, rushed over, his face a mixture of panic and awe. He started to apologize profusely to Keanu, but Keanu cut him short, politely but firmly. "Your apology should be to Mrs. Coleman," he said, gesturing to Clara. "And more importantly, what are you going to do to ensure this kind of behavior from your staff never happens again?" The manager, thoroughly chastened, promised immediate action and a review of staff training. As they finally reached the checkout with a cart overflowing with groceries, essentials, and a few special treats for Leo, including a small, well-chosen toy truck that had caught his eye, Keanu paid the substantial bill without a glance at the total. Gary, who had been replaced at the register by a much more respectful and flustered senior cashier, stood to the side, his head bowed, the picture of dejection. Keanu walked over to him. "Everyone makes mistakes, Gary," Keanu said quietly, away from the main crowd. The mark of a person isn't whether they fall, but how they get up. Learn from this. Choose kindness next time. It's a much better way to live. Gary could only nod, tears in his own eyes now. Outside, as Keanu helped a beaming Leo load bags into a taxi he'd called for Clara, insisting her old groceries be packed too. A small crowd had gathered. Keanu simply smiled, gave a small wave, and then, as discreetly as he had arrived, slipped away, leaving behind a grocery store and a grandmother and her grandson, forever changed by an unexpected encounter and an extraordinary act of kindness. The story of what happened that day, however, was just beginning to spread. The days immediately following the grocery store incident, as it quickly became known online, were a whirlwind for Clara and Leo. A customer, who had indeed discreetly filmed Keanu's intervention and the subsequent shopping spree, posted the video online. It spread like wildfire. Millions viewed it, shared it, and commented on it, touched by the raw display of humility, injustice, and profound kindness. Messages of support poured in for Clara and Leo from all over the world. Local news outlets picked up the story, though Keanu's representatives, true to his nature, declined all requests for interviews, subtly guiding the narrative towards the broader issues of poverty, respect for the elderly, and the struggles of single grandparents raising children. Clara, a woman who had lived her life in quiet anonymity, suddenly found herself the recipient of an outpouring of goodwill. Flowers arrived at her small apartment, then gift baskets, then small anonymous donations to a quickly established local community fund in her name. She was overwhelmed, unused to such attention, but deeply moved. The most significant change, however, was in her spirit. The heavy cloak of shame and constant worry she had worn for so long had begun to lift, replaced by a tentative, fragile hope. Leo, too, was blossoming. The new toys were exciting, of course, but it was the memory of Keanu's kindness, the feeling of being seen and valued, that made him walk a little taller, his smile a little brighter. He proudly told his school friends about Mr. Keanu, the real-life superhero. Meanwhile, the grocery store chain, facing a public relations storm, was forced into action. The manager, Mr. Henderson, who had appeared after Keanu's intervention, publicly apologized to Clara and announced a company-wide review of customer service policies and new intensive empathy training for all employees. Gary, the cashier, was suspended, but the story took another unexpected turn. After a period of deep reflection and prompted by Keanu's quiet words to him, Gary himself reached out to the store management. He didn't make excuses for his behavior. Instead, he expressed profound remorse and, surprisingly, volunteered to be the first to undergo the new training, and even to help facilitate it, sharing his own humbling experience as a cautionary tale. He wanted, he said, a chance to make amends, not just to Clara and Leo, but to himself. This, too, became part of the viral narrative, a story of a mistake, a lesson learned, and the possibility of redemption. Keanu, true to his word, remained in the background, but he hadn't forgotten Clara and Leo. About a week after the incident, as the media frenzy began to die down, Clara received an unexpected phone call. "Hello?" she answered, her voice still a little apprehensive with unfamiliar numbers. "Hi, Clara. This is Keanu Reeves." Clara nearly dropped the phone. "Mr. Reeves, I didn't expect... It's so good to hear from you. How are you?" "I'm well, Clara. Thank you." "And you, Leo?" Keanu's voice was as warm and gentle as she remembered. "I've been thinking about you both, and I wanted to discuss something with you." something more lasting than a cart full of groceries. Clara listened, her heart pounding as Keanu explained his idea. He had been deeply moved by her devotion to Leo and by Leo's bright spirit. He wanted to ensure Leo had every opportunity in life. Working discreetly through his foundation, he had arranged to set up an educational trust for Leo, one that would cover his schooling all the way through college, should he choose to go. It would mean, Keanu explained, that you wouldn't have to worry about that aspect of his future, Clara. You could focus on giving him all the love and support he needs right now, without that constant financial pressure. Clara was silent for a long moment, tears streaming down her face. This generosity was beyond anything she could have imagined. Mr. Reeves, Keanu, there are no words, she finally managed, her voice thick with emotion. You've already done so much. This is a miracle. There's no need for thanks, Clara, Keanu replied softly. Think of it as an investment in a bright young man, and a small way to honor the memory of his mother, Sophia. You just continue being the incredible grandmother you are. That's the most important thing. The educational trust was set up quietly, without fanfare. Keanu made sure it was managed in a way that gave Clara peace of mind and Leo the best possible start. For Keanu, it wasn't about public accolade. It was about making a tangible, lasting difference. He knew the viral video had sparked a conversation about kindness, but he also knew that real change often happened in these quiet, personal acts of sustained support. He had seen a need, felt a connection, and had simply acted upon it, using his resources to amplify a moment of compassion into a lifetime of opportunity. The world might see him as a movie star, an action hero. But in that small apartment, to a grateful grandmother and a hopeful little boy, he was something far more profound. A guardian angel, a restorer of faith, a quiet architect of a brighter future. The establishment of Leo's educational trust was a quiet turning point, a silent promise of a future less burdened by financial anxiety for Clara. The immediate, overwhelming wave of public attention and support that followed the viral video began to recede, allowing Clara and Leo to adjust to their new reality, which was not one of sudden riches, but of a newfound security and a profound sense of being cared for. The generosity of strangers, inspired by Keanu's initial act, had provided them with a comfortable cushion, allowing Clara to finally breathe a little easier, to focus on Leo's well-being without the constant gnawing fear of how she would make ends meet. Leo, with the natural resilience of childhood, adapted quickly. The Keanu Day, as he called it, became a treasured memory, not just for the toys or the overflowing cart of treats, but for the feeling of being special, of being seen. He did well in school, his curiosity and brightness now unclouded by the subtle anxieties that even a child can absorb from a struggling household. The educational trust meant that Clara could dream bigger dreams for him, encouraging his interests in science and art without worrying about the cost of books or after-school programs. She often found herself looking at the framed photo Keanu had later sent them. A candid shot of the three of them in the grocery store, their faces beaming, and a quiet gratitude would fill her. It was a reminder that even in the darkest of times, kindness could bloom in the most unexpected places. The grocery store chain, Price Mart, as it was generically known, did indeed follow through on its promises. The manager, Mr. Henderson, implemented a new, comprehensive customer service training program titled the Clara Initiative, emphasizing empathy, patience, and respectful communication. And Gary, in a move that surprised many, became one of its most ardent champions. He didn't just lead training sessions. He actively participated, sharing his own story with raw honesty. His voice often thick with emotion as he recounted his shame and the profound lesson Keanu had taught him. He spoke of how easy it was to fall into a pattern of cynicism and impatience. How easy it was to forget the humanity of the person Stoichi on the other side of the counter. His transformation was not immediate or miraculous, but a slow, deliberate effort. He made a point of apologizing personally to Clara again, not in a grand gesture, but in a quiet, heartfelt conversation when she next visited the store, no longer counting coins with trembling hands, but using a modest gift card the store had provided as part of its apology. Clara, with her innate grace, accepted his apology, seeing in his eyes a genuine desire for change. The viral video, while its initial sensationalism faded, left a lasting cultural imprint. It became a frequently cited example in discussions about everyday kindness, corporate responsibility, and the quiet power of celebrity influence when used for good. Be a Keanu became a shorthand on social media for choosing compassion over cynicism. Keanu himself, of course, never commented on it publicly, deflecting any praise and ensuring the focus remained on the broader issues the incident had highlighted. His foundation continued its work discreetly, supporting various causes related to child welfare and poverty alleviation, occasionally receiving anonymous tips about families like Clara and Leo's who needed a helping hand. Years passed. Leo, no longer a small boy clutching a package of cookies, was now a bright, articulate teenager, excelling in high school, his future pathway to college smoothed by the trust Keanu had established. He never lost his sense of wonder, nor his deep love and gratitude for his grandmother. He often volunteered at local community centers, a quiet echo of the kindness that had so profoundly shaped his own life. Clara, though older, had a lightness about her, a peace that had been absent for so many years. The constant struggle had eased, allowing her to enjoy her grandson's successes and to find simple joys in her daily life. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara and Leo were walking through a park not far from their apartment. Leo was excitedly talking about a science project, his hands gesturing animatedly. As they passed a bench, Clara noticed a familiar figure sitting alone, gazing at the falling leaves. He was older, his dark hair now streaked with more silver than she remembered from the news clips, but the kind eyes and the quiet, contemplative aura were unmistakable. It was Keanu Reeves. He wasn't surrounded by an entourage, just a man enjoying a moment of solitude in a public park. Clara hesitated for only a second before approaching him, Leo by her side. "Mr. Reeves?" she said softly. Keanu looked up, a gentle smile of recognition spreading across his face. "Clara. And Leo, my goodness. Look at how you've grown." They spoke for a while, not about the past, not about the grocery store, but about everyday things. Leo's school, Clara's small garden, the changing seasons. It was a simple, unforced conversation, imbued with a deep, unspoken understanding. As they prepared to part ways, Clara found the words she had wanted to say for years. "You know, Keanu," she said, her voice filled with a quiet emotion. "That day, you didn't just give us groceries, or even an education for Leo. You gave us back our dignity. You reminded an old woman and a little boy that they mattered, and that is a gift beyond any price." Keanu's eyes softened. He simply nodded, a profound empathy in his gaze. "You both mattered a great deal to me too, Clara," he said. "Your strength, Your love for Leo, that's the real inspiration. He watched them walk away. Leo, now almost as tall as his grandmother, his arm heard gently. A single, perfectly formed autumn leaf drifted down and landed at Keanu's feet. He picked it up, a faint smile playing on his lips. The city hummed around him, a vast and underscore unknown of stories unfolding every second. He had been a small part of one, a catalyst for a ripple of kindness that had spread further than he could have known. And in that quiet moment, in the heart of the bustling city, he felt a profound sense of connection, a reaffirmation that even the smallest act of genuine compassion could indeed illuminate the darkest corners and change the course of a life. The inexplicable urge that had led him down that grocery aisle years ago had, it seemed, found its quiet, enduring answer. The encounter in a simple grocery store blossomed into a legacy of hope, a testament to how one person's choice to see beyond the surface can rewrite futures. Clara, Leo, Gary, and even Keanu himself were touched and transformed by a moment that could have easily been lost in the noise of everyday life. It reminds us that opportunities for profound kindness are all around us, often disguised in the most ordinary of circumstances. What seemingly small act of compassion can you extend today? The ripple effect might just surprise you. If this story warmed your heart, there are many more waiting to be discovered. Click the screen to explore further tales of hope, human connection, and the enduring power of a generous spirit.